Did you know that the average person over the age of 60 drinks more than 1,200 cups of coffee every single year? That's nearly 100,000 cups across a lifetime. And yet, most seniors are missing the one simple ingredient that could transform their daily coffee from just a morning pick-me-up into something far more powerful. Something that research suggests may help slow the growth of certain abnormal cells, awaken dormant repair systems in the body, and even support the kind of cellular maintenance that keeps you sharp, mobile, and energetic well into your 70s and 80s. The strangest part? This ingredient probably already sits in your kitchen cabinet. You've used it on toast. You've stirred it into oatmeal. But you've likely never thought to add it to the one drink you reach for every single morning. I'm Dr. Edward Collins, and over the past 30-plus years of clinical practice, I've spent a great deal of time studying how small, daily habits shape the long-term health of my older patients. And I can tell you, the patients who age the best, the ones who stay independent, mentally clear, and physically capable into their late 70s and 80s, almost always have one thing in common. They've made tiny, consistent adjustments to the things they were already doing. They didn't overhaul their lives. They didn't take dozens of supplements. They simply optimized what was already part of their daily routine. And coffee, for most seniors, is one of the most powerful daily habits to optimize. So let me ask you something. Have you ever finished your morning coffee and felt that little dip about an hour later? That foggy stretch where your energy fades, your focus slips, and you start thinking about a second cup? Or maybe you've noticed that despite drinking coffee for decades, you still feel inflammation in your joints, stiffness in your hands, or a kind of general slowness that wasn't there 10 or 15 years ago. If any of that sounds familiar, what I'm about to share with you could change the way you think about your coffee for the rest of your life. Let me tell you about a patient of mine. I'll call her Margaret. She was 68 when she first came into my office, and she described herself as, in her own words, generally healthy but tired all the time. She walked her dog every morning. She ate reasonably well. She drank 2 cups of black coffee a day, just like she had for 40 years. But her blood work told a different story. Her inflammation markers were elevated. Her fasting blood sugar was creeping up. And she mentioned that her memory wasn't quite what it used to be. She kept losing track of names, forgetting why she'd walked into a room. Now, Margaret didn't have any serious disease, nothing alarming, but she was on the slow, quiet path that I've seen hundreds of patients walk down. The path where small inflammatory signals build up over years and eventually contribute to bigger problems. So I suggested something small. I asked her to add a 1/4 teaspoon of a specific spice to her morning coffee every day for 90 days. That was it. No other changes. And when she came back 3 months later, her inflammation markers had dropped significantly. Her fasting glucose had come down, and she told me, almost offhandedly, that her thinking felt clearer than it had in years. So what was the spice? It was cinnamon. But not just any cinnamon, and that distinction matters enormously, which I'll get to in just a moment. Here's the science behind why this works, and I'll keep it simple. Coffee, on its own, is actually one of the richest sources of antioxidants in the average person's diet. It contains a compound called chlorogenic acid, which research suggests may help regulate blood sugar, support healthy blood vessels, and protect cells from oxidative damage. That's part of why studies have consistently shown that moderate coffee drinkers tend to have lower rates of certain chronic conditions. But here's where it gets interesting. When you add cinnamon, specifically a compound called cinnamaldehyde, to coffee, something remarkable happens. The polyphenols in cinnamon and the polyphenols in coffee interact in a way that researchers describe as synergistic. In simple terms, the combined antioxidant activity becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Some laboratory studies have found that this pairing can roughly triple the antioxidant capacity of plain coffee. Think of it like this. Coffee alone is a single lantern in a dark room. Add cinnamon, and you've suddenly got 3 lanterns lighting up the same space. Now let's talk about what that actually does inside your body, because this is where it gets truly fascinating. There are 3 specific benefits I want to walk you through, and I want you to pay close attention to the third one in particular, because most people have never heard of it. The first benefit involves how cinnamaldehyde appears to interact with abnormal cells. Cancer cells, by their nature, are extremely hungry. They consume glucose at a much faster rate than healthy cells. That's actually how PET scans work in oncology. The scanner looks for areas of unusually high glucose uptake. Now, research published over the past decade suggests that cinnamaldehyde may interfere with the way certain abnormal cells absorb and metabolize glucose. In laboratory settings, this compound has been shown to reduce the activity of specific glucose transporters that tumor cells rely on. The implication is significant. By making glucose less available to these abnormal cells, you may be creating an internal environment that's less hospitable to their growth. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a cure for anything. Cinnamon will not treat cancer. But the body has its own surveillance systems, and supporting those systems with the right daily nutrients may help them function more effectively. That's the principle at work here. The second benefit relates to something called stem cells. Most people don't realize that even at 70 or 80 years old, your body still contains stem cells. These are the master cells responsible for repairing tissue, replacing worn-out cells, and maintaining the integrity of your organs. The problem is that as we age, many of these stem cells go dormant. They're still there, but they're not active. They're like workers who showed up at the factory but never clocked in. Chlorogenic acid, the same compound I mentioned earlier in coffee, has been studied for its potential role in activating these dormant cells. And when you combine it with the polyphenols in cinnamon, that activation signal appears to strengthen. What this means in practical terms is that your body's natural repair systems, the ones that fix damaged tissue in your joints, your skin, your blood vessels, your brain, may begin to function more efficiently. This is part of why patients like Margaret often report feeling, in their words, simply younger after a few months of this small change. And now, the third benefit, which is the one I really want you to remember. Your DNA is under constant attack. Every single day, your cells experience thousands of small DNA injuries from oxidative stress, from environmental toxins, from the simple metabolic process of being alive. Fortunately, your body has DNA repair enzymes whose entire job is to fix this damage before it causes problems. But as we age, these enzymes can become less active. The polyphenol combination from cinnamon and coffee has been shown in some research to support the activity of these repair enzymes. In other words, you're not just preventing damage, you're helping your body actively fix damage that's already occurred. And when DNA repair functions well, just about every other system in the body benefits, from immune function to skin health to cognitive sharpness. Now, I promised I'd come back to the type of cinnamon, and this is critically important, so please don't skip this part. There are two main types of cinnamon sold in stores. The first, and most common, is called cassia cinnamon. This is the cheap, dark red-brown cinnamon you'll find in most grocery stores. The second is called Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon. It's lighter in color, more tan than red, and it costs a bit more. Here's why this matters. Cassia cinnamon contains relatively high levels of a compound called coumarin. In small, occasional amounts, coumarin is fine, but in daily doses, especially over months or years, coumarin may put stress on the liver and, in some cases, has been associated with concerns in patients with existing liver conditions or those on blood-thinning medications. Ceylon cinnamon, on the other hand, contains only trace amounts of coumarin, making it far better suited for daily use. So if you're going to do this, and I genuinely hope you will, please look for Ceylon cinnamon specifically. The label will say Ceylon, or sometimes Cinnamomum verum. Avoid anything just labeled cinnamon with no further specification, because it's almost certainly cassia. The dose I generally suggest is about 1/4 teaspoon per cup of coffee. That's it. You don't need a tablespoon. You don't need to make it a paste. Just 1/4 teaspoon, stirred into your hot coffee, ideally first thing in the morning. Some patients tell me it took them a week or two to enjoy the taste, but most come to love it. And if you find the flavor too strong, you can start with 1/8 teaspoon and work up. Let me share another patient story, because I think it illustrates something important. I had a gentleman, I'll call him Robert, who came to see me at 74. He'd had a mild stroke 2 years before, recovered well, but was concerned about prevention going forward. His main complaint, though, wasn't medical in the traditional sense. He said he felt mentally slower. He couldn't keep up with his grandchildren's conversations the way he used to. He'd start a sentence and lose the thread halfway through. Now, Robert was already on his medications, doing his physical therapy, eating reasonably well. So when I suggested he add Ceylon cinnamon to his coffee, he looked at me like I was joking. He actually laughed. He said, "With all due respect, doctor, that sounds like something out of a magazine." But he agreed to try it. And about 4 months later, his wife actually called my office to ask what I'd done to him. She said he was reading the newspaper again, finishing books, telling stories at dinner. He told me at his next appointment that he felt like the fog had simply lifted. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not suggesting that cinnamon alone caused this transformation. Robert was doing many things right. But the addition of this one small daily habit appeared to be the tipping point, the final piece that allowed all the other good work he was doing to really take effect. So how do you put this into practice in your own life? Let me give you some clear, realistic steps. First, buy Ceylon cinnamon specifically. You can find it at most health food stores, larger grocery stores, or online. It doesn't need to be expensive. A small jar will last you months. Second, start with a 1/4 teaspoon per cup of coffee. Stir it in while the coffee is still hot, because heat helps release the active compounds. If the cinnamon settles at the bottom, that's normal. You can stir it again before each sip, or if you use a French press or pour-over method, you can add the cinnamon directly to the grounds before brewing, which gives an even more thorough infusion. Third, if you want to amplify the effect, you can occasionally swap or combine cinnamon with a small amount of raw cacao powder, which is rich in flavonoids, or a tiny pinch of turmeric paired with a few grains of black pepper. The black pepper contains piperine, which research suggests significantly increases the body's absorption of turmeric's active compound, curcumin. Just a small pinch. We're not making curry here, we're enriching your coffee. Fourth, be patient. The kind of cellular benefits I've described don't happen overnight. Most patients begin to notice subtle changes around 3 weeks in. Things like steadier energy, less afternoon fogginess, slightly better digestion. By 6 weeks, many report sleeping more deeply. By 90 days, the changes in blood work, when we measure them, often become quite clear, with reductions in inflammatory markers and improvements in fasting glucose. Fifth, and this is important, please talk to your doctor before making this change if you're on certain medications. Cinnamon can interact with blood thinners and may affect blood sugar control in patients on diabetes medication. It's not dangerous, but it's worth a conversation, especially if your doctor needs to monitor your numbers. If you're up for it, I'd encourage you to try what I sometimes call the 30-day coffee challenge. Here's how it tends to unfold. In the first week, you may notice mostly just the taste change and perhaps a small lift in your morning energy. By the second week, many people report that their digestion feels more regular and they're less hungry between meals, likely because cinnamon may help moderate blood sugar swings. By the third week, the subtle shifts begin. Slightly better focus, a touch more endurance during walks, and in some cases, less joint stiffness in the morning. And by the fourth week, when patients return for follow-up, we often see measurable improvements in inflammation markers, sometimes a noticeable drop in fasting glucose, and patients describing themselves as just feeling better overall. Now, before we close, I want to remind you of something. The point of this isn't that cinnamon is some miracle. There are no miracles in medicine. The point is that small, consistent choices made every single day over months and years are what shape how you age. 1 cup of coffee with cinnamon doesn't change your life, but that same cup every morning for the next 10 years, that can absolutely change the trajectory of your health. I've watched patients in their 70s and 80s stay sharp, mobile, and engaged in life, not because they did anything extreme, but because they did simple things, consistently, with care and attention. They paid attention to what they put in their body, especially the things they consumed every single day. You already drink coffee. You're already going to drink it tomorrow morning. The only question is whether you'll add that 1/4 teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon when you do. If this video helped you think differently about your morning routine, I'd encourage you to share it with someone you love, especially someone who could benefit from a small change that makes a big difference over time. And remember, you don't have to overhaul your entire life to age well. You just have to be willing to make one small, thoughtful improvement at a time. Take care of yourself. Drink that good cup of coffee tomorrow morning, and I'll see you in the next one.